What's up YouTube? Welcome to today's video, and today's video is going to be pretty disturbing if you've been following PoE, and it has to do with the monster mods FAQ that pretty much ties into how loot. So if you haven't played PoE recently, they did a huge loot overhaul where they nerfed the historic bonus of rarity and quantity for a lot of the old league mechanic monsters and replaced it with a conversion system where you're pretty much forced to interact with loot goblins in order to get a lot of loot. So Arch Nemesis was pretty much the biggest problem in PoE for casual players, and they have addressed it. They got rid of Arch Nemesis altogether. We're pretty much back to a scenario where it is Nemesis 2.0. So Arch Nemesis was really bad for casual players. Most of them did not have the best builds. And if you were playing a single element type, you would oftentimes encounter a rare which would be nearly unkillable. So with the biggest problem out of the way and pretty much in my eyes more or less completely solved, we have moved on to the bigger problems plaguing the game today, and that is crafting / gear progression and loot. In today's video, we're pretty much going to be discussing loot and how it affects you and why the new rare mod system currently is in a state where there is a lot of stuff that still has to be determined and tested. And that is not a good sign, as the league is scheduled to be announced or launched on December 9th, leaving there probably less than a month or so to fully test out the system. So currently GGG has a system where they are putting out an FAQ after the Balance Manifesto, and that's pretty much to answer all of the burning questions that people may have. And there are some answers in this Monster Mod FAQ that really raises your eyebrow and is like, are we sure that this system is going to work well? So they pretty much addressed how monster mods or rare mods are going to work in terms of loot, difficulty, and other factors. So the number one problem right now that people have pretty much realized is that a Pandora's box has opened, and that is the Magic Find conundrum. So before, most people don't really think about Magic Find that much, and that's because there are alternate ways to get loot. If you just killed a lot of mobs, you could have done Nemesis 3 in the past, you would get a lot of loot. Nowadays, you're pretty much forced to go into reward templates, whether it is Legion or Expedition or Heist, in order to get guaranteed loot. And if you wanted to juice maps without Magic Find, you would pretty much be losing money over and over again. So Magic Find has always been extremely overpowered. I think it is very important not understate how overpowered Magic Find was and has always been. There's a reason why they removed the item quantity support gem, and there's a reason why item quantity doesn't really exist on any rare gear besides legacy gear. So the presence of loot goblins and the absence of mobs dropping loot has exacerbated the issue. So at this point, if you look on Reddit, a lot of people have figured out that Magic Find is very, very toxic for the game because they feel forced to opt into it. Now, before, they didn't really feel as forced because there were other ways of obtaining loot. Now, the reason why Magic Find feels bad is it limits build diversity because every build wants a baseline of rarity and quantity, making certain items mandatory. You will see later on that when GGG writes this FAQ, they even mention how Magic Find has a diminishing return. Now, diminishing return is not a good thing in this case, because that means you want to have that baseline of quantity and rarity so that your character has as much opportunity to find as much loot as possible while sacrificing as little of your character power as possible. Now, what this means is that there is going to be a huge homogenization of every single item that people use, and we can already kind of see this in this league in that people were using 2 Ventors a lot of times, or 2 Pariahs, but mostly Ventors for the rarity. They'll use a rare helm with the Janus Fractured with a 60% rarity if you kill a rare or unique. And then they would probably use an item rarity gem, and then they might use an Elegant Hubris to get as much rarity, and that would give them around 300 to 400% rarity. And lastly, everyone is going to be running a Gold Flask with the rarity suffix on it. So it pretty much makes all these certain items mandatory. It takes away all of this build choice in PoE, the stuff that makes PoE really fun to play, where you try to min-max your character, and you're not really building a more powerful character, you're building a more powerful Magic Finder. And for a lot of people, that kind of ruins the power fantasy in an ARPG, where you're trying to make your character as strong as possible, and you should be rewarded for doing the hardest content. And that's how PoE has always kind of been in a weird way. If you look how maps work, the harder your maps are rolled, the more loot that you'll be rewarded with. If you're running minus max, you get as much pack size as possible. You get increased effective non-monster or like the map modifiers, then you will see that you will get more quant and rarity. And that is how it's always been. Now, another problem is that the GGG has introduced this conversion loot mechanic thing, which allows you to exponentially scale magic finds. So what that means is that in the past, if you wanted to find more currency, only increased quantity would help. But now the way that you find currency, and we'll see it here, is that you can see here, it says dropped items are converted to currency based on rarity. So that means that your rarity is also helping. So what we get is this multiplicative effect where you have quantity and rarity affecting the amount of currency that you're finding. So before it was only quantity, but now they have this conversion loot mechanic thing where your quantity and rarity helps because you will drop more unique items, which will all get converted to currency, which will also become divine orbs, exalted orbs, or nulls. Now, I'm going to go over the Monster Mod FAQ really fast because I do think that there are some important answers in here and there are some very concerning answers. So first off, they're pretty much saying that the monsters will have 2 to 4 mods in general, so we won't have to worry about having like 12 or some ridiculous amount of monster mods. And they do say that some of the monster mods will be rebalanced in terms of the value, so there's really no way to know what these new values are. If we go by how GGG does things, we will never know what these monster values are until after the league launches. And then they pretty much are saying every single mod will give the monster an increase in life, experience, item rarity, and quantity. So I never really knew that before, that every single extra mod a monster has, it always gave it a little bit of a life bonus. Now, if you remember when they did this Arch Nemesis change added into the base game, they made it so that the encounters like Abyss and Breach and stuff like that, or Harbinger even, have a lot less rare monsters that end up spawning. And they are not going to revert this change even though they have removed Arch Nemesis. So this is kind of an interesting thing. So they don't want the maps to be as packed with rare monsters, even though the rare monsters are probably going to be a lot easier on average. Now, they do say we'll still run into Katava Touch, you'll still run into Solar's Touch, but it will be extremely rare. And then this is an interesting question. Someone asked about stealing ignites, and if you steal the monster damage can ignite, then you'll also be able to ignite with your own fire damage. And this is the one question here, and from here on out, everything kind of turns into some really, really scary answers. So right here, is this a nerf to Headhunter? Mods will not be able to stack. So you cannot stack mods on with the Headhunter like before. So Headhunter is going to be weaker, right? But not according to them. They said there are more mods to steal, which is a buff to the upper end of Headhunter gameplay. So this is a factually incorrect statement that is only correct in the most extreme cases, maybe if you're doing a 5-way where you're killing like 40 rare monsters in the span of a minute. But for almost every other case, besides maybe like having like 5 legions that you're popping back to back to back to back, in most cases, it is impossible for Headhunter to retain the same power level as before. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, Headhunter shouldn't be the end-all, be-all item that everything is balanced around. But this statement right here kind of shows that they don't really know what is the limiting factor of Headhunter, and the limiting factor of Headhunter is the extremely low amount of rares in maps with the nerfed Beyond. So next up, can we have some examples of the new reward types being introduced? And they pretty much say, nope, not yet. It's still being worked on. And then here, does this mean I'm forced to play Magic Find all the time now? And they pretty much give a statement that I've pretty much said in the past, where they say that Magic Find has always been overpowered in the past, and everyone has always sacrificed a bit of character power for Magic Find. So they say if you're able to sacrifice character power for Magic Find, then you'll find more and better items. That was true before 3.19 and is the nature of Magic Find in ARPGs. Note that Magic Find has diminishing returns, so a small investment can go a long way. So they are pretty much saying that Magic Find is a core tenet in every ARPG, and if you are able to sacrifice your character power, then you should do it if you want to find more loot. Now, the problem with this is that just leads to the homogenization of builds. It makes everyone want to invest into the baseline of Magic Find, and especially when you say that there's diminishing returns, that makes it that so you want to invest in a small amount of Magic Find or 300% rarity or so because that's where it has the most value. Now, how have reward conversions changed? And we do see that reward conversions are toxic because it allows Magic Find to scale it multiplicatively in terms of quantity and rarity. And they pretty much say only some of the new rewards are conversion ones. So we don't really know if that means like the God Touch ones in terms of currency are going to remain conversion and it's going to still be based on rarity. But they are removing the undesirable ones like conversion to flash. So Droughtbringer is not really going to be as bad. And we're trying to make the rewards from rare monsters not so all or nothing. So they're pretty much trying to even out the spikes of loot that we'll be getting that we currently have with the loot goblins, which is a pretty good thing. But it remains to be seen what they're actually going to do. So what they could possibly do is maybe they can make some of these God Touch more common, but make it so it's not converted based on rarity, which would actually greatly nerf how much Magic Find would affect it. Now, does Magic Find still massively affect the reward conversions? And they're saying we're still iterating on these systems and don't want to set expectation around this in either direction just yet. So they pretty much don't really want to give away what they're going to be doing, but reward conversions still exist. And you can clearly see from how GGG worded this that they believe that Magic Find should still exist in PoE and it should still have a very, very strong impact if you do decide to invest in a little bit of it. But I think at this point, the community has found out that Magic Find is extremely broken and that everyone at this point is probably going to try to fit a little bit of it into their build, especially if the conversion stuff still exists in some sense. Now, this is the conversion thing for Arch Nemesis, and they are pretty much just going to hide these mods onto the rare mods so we can't really see what it has. So, in my opinion, they're probably just going to copy and paste the Arch Nemesis system and hide it for the monsters, and we're probably going to have a very, very similar system of loot goblins to how we had before. Now, as I said, one of the solutions is to make the rarity of items not affect the reward conversion for rarity of currency, and that would help it so that Magic Find won't result in someone finding like 30 divines. However, that does lead to the problem is that the loot already feels pretty scarce, right? So if you actually nerf loot goblins or nerf or remove it entirely and then replace it with nothing, then loot from juice maps and group play will be in an absolutely atrocious state. One of the main reasons why Empyrean quit at the start was because the loot goblins and the currency conversion stuff was not really figured out. So that's why they were doing maps and pretty much losing money, even though they were splitting the cost of the map nearly 6 ways. And loot goblins are probably not the best thing for the game, but the problem is that the loot goblins is the only thing that actually drops loot outside of the reward templates. So without the loot goblins, and if you just nerf the loot goblins completely and you don't replace it with anything else that comes even close, then we will have an issue where people will complain that PoE has a problem with loot, and the only way they're able to get loot is from Expedition, Heist, and Legion. And it's just exactly the same problem as we had last time. I do think the loot goblin thing was not really figured out in its entirety until a lot of people had already quit the league. So we will see what happens. So the looting system, which doesn't work well with juicing, was a more alarming problem than Arch Nemesis in 3.19. And I do think that this statement is entirely correct. Arch Nemesis was really toxic for a lot of players, but once people got good enough builds or they started playing more meta builds, Arch Nemesis is really not as big of a problem as how the game felt like no matter, even if you made a stronger character and you were doing more or harder content, you were not getting rewarded with an appropriate level of currency. Now, I do think a step in the right direction would perhaps be buffing Beyond, as the current Beyond is a clown fiesta. There's no reason why Beyond should stop spawning as soon as you encounter a Scourge boss. And at this point, we are in a scary state of events, as it seems like the new reward system will not be extensively tested before release, as it is still being worked on. We are very close to release at this point, I think around like 2 to 3 weeks. So it is pretty much not going to get that much testing. There's not going to be any alpha feedback, or I don't really know, maybe there will be. But we will probably be the beta testers in 3.20, and that is kind of a scary state of events, especially when loot is the most fundamental part of ARPGs, in my opinion. You play the ARPG to find more loot, and if you have to find more loot by sacrificing your character power and your build choices, then that is not a good state of affairs. Now, a little bit of copium. There is a lot of doom and gloom in this video, I know. Maybe Eldritch Altars will fix everything. However, Eldritch Altars are the backbone of how you currently find loot and how out and go mapping even works. So yeah, it's kind of scary. Maybe the Eldritch Altars will be nerfed and loot will be even in an even worse state, or maybe Eldritch Altars will be buffed magically and loot will be better than before, and every way of farming will result in the monsters actually dropping loot rather than it being chests and reward templates. But thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about loot in general and juice maps or maybe the base game, and how you would approach this new reward system. But I hope you find more mirrors, exalted orbs, and divines and loot goblins than me, and see you next time. Bye!